Good morning. Committee will come to order. Secretary Wormuth, General McConnell, welcome back to our subcommittee. It's good to have you here. We appreciate your leadership of our nation's Army, and we look forward to discussing with you the Army's priorities for fiscal year 2023, as well as other timely topics, such as the Army's role in supporting Ukraine and its war against Russia. No matter how large the budget, each budget cycle, we wrestle with competing priorities of investing in key capabilities to support soldiers and their families, maintaining high levels of readiness, and continuing modernization efforts for the future fight. The Army is attempting to drive transformation to the Army of 2030, recognizing a strategic pivot from a focus on counterterrorism to an Army ready to meet the top-pacing challenge in China and the acute threat of Russian aggression. First and foremost, you are the people-centric service. Soldiers, their families, civilians empower the Army. We need to make sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time, enabling the Army to deploy, fight, and win as a part of the joint force. Yet your fiscal year 2023 budget request trims the size of the active duty Army to 473,000 troops, a reduction of 12,000 soldiers. We want to make sure we fully understand the rationale for and the operational impact of this proposed adjustment. You're also suggesting numerous changes to ongoing acquisition programs. As a subcommittee, we need to know whether the dollars in this budget are enough to continue development and increase production on your required warfighting capabilities without jeopardizing today's readiness. And finally, we're interested in hearing about the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine, from the type of threats you are seeing, to how you may adjust soldier training going forward. The insights gained here will be key to shaping future military operations. I want to thank you both again for appearing here before us today. I look forward to your testimony on fiscal year 2023 budget requests. Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Wormuth, General McConnell, I too want to welcome you back to the subcommittee. I'm looking forward to hearing from both of you on the Army's fiscal year 2023 budget request. But I have to say at the outset, I'm concerned by the Army's request. We all are. With inflation at the highest levels we've seen in 40 years, the request represents a cut from the 22-22 level. The Army is 4 years into a once-in-a-generation modernization of its force structure that you all know, and that will shape the nation's ground forces for decades to come. As you rightly note in your written statement, modernization is future readiness. We've got to have it. Yet the Army's unfunded list contains several $1 billion worth of self-assessed, high-risk modernization requirements seemingly left out of the budget request because of an inadequate top line. It's always a money problem, as we all know, for you and us. The Army must also be sufficiently resourced to fight and win in today's increasingly complex security environment. And as we meet today, we're witnessing the most significant ground war in Europe since World War II, and the Ukraine, of course, is fighting hard to repel Putin's misguided, I think, and poorly executed invasion. The Army is playing a key role here, as you well know, by rapidly deploying thousands of soldiers to reassure, and we have to, our NATO allies and also support Ukraine where we can. We also need a strong Army to deter China and respond to provocations by Iran, North Korea, and radical extremist groups. You know all this well. To date, the Army has risen to those challenges, and I thank you. Thanks to consistent and sufficient investments in people, in readiness, and in modernization. I look forward to hearing just how this budget will continue to enable you as the Army to meet the future needs today and in the future. I have my doubts about these numbers that you're requesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shelby. Secretary Wormuth, General McConnell, once again, thanks for being here. You guys have the floor. Please note that your entire written statement will be part of the record.
Good morning, gentlemen. Chairman Tester, Vice Chairman Shelby, distinguished... Sure. Is that better? Distinguished members of the committee, it's great to be here this morning, and thank you for your ongoing support of the Army as we significantly transform to meet future threats. I'm very pleased to appear before you today at about the one-year mark as serving as Secretary of the Army. We've accomplished a lot this year, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. We remain focused on our three key priorities: readiness, modernization, and people. The FY23 budget request enables us to support the National Defense Strategy, take care of our people, and meet operational demands abroad and at home. We're investing $35 billion in modernization, almost $2 billion in military housing and infrastructure, and we're funding 22 combat training center rotations in FY23. As the chairman said, we have decided to trim our end strength, and we're doing this really because we want to stay focused on quality and make sure that we have the quality soldiers in the force. We didn't want to lower our recruiting standards. At the same time, we are working hard to adjust our recruiting efforts given the challenging recruiting environment that we and the other services are facing. We're also committed to maintaining momentum on our 6 modernization portfolios. In FY23 alone, we will field 4 long-range precision fire systems: the long-range hypersonic weapon, the PRISM precision strike missile, the ship-sinking mid-range capability, and the extended-range cannon artillery. We're also modernizing our air and missile defense systems, and we're going to be building one more Patriot battalion in our force structure. And finally, we're continuing to fund FLRAA and FARA, and we intend to field those aircraft in around FY30. As important as it is to maintain momentum on modernization, people are the strength of our Army and our greatest asset. This budget increases soldier and Army civilian pay and funds a number of quality of life improvements, including barracks, family housing, and child care initiatives. We're also still focused on building positive command climates across the Army. Positive command climates begin with good leaders, and our new leader assessment programs are helping us to select the very best leaders for command. To reduce harmful behaviors, we're building out a prevention workforce that will help us with our efforts to build strong, cohesive teams that are trained, disciplined, and fit. Our Sharp Fusion Directorate pilot brings together in one place all of the resources that are needed to help victims of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and those pilots are up and running. We've also hired a civilian director for our Criminal Investigative Division, and we're establishing the Office of the Special Trial Counsel this summer. We are also continuing to strive to prevent suicide in our ranks. We've started conducting 100% mental health wellness checks in some of our units, and we are surging behavioral health resources to where they're most needed, even as we confront the nationwide shortage of providers. As we focus on taking care of soldiers and our families, we are also transforming to meet future threats, but we are also playing a key role here and now. Today, we have over 47,000 soldiers in Europe to reassure our allies, deter aggression against NATO territory, and to help Ukraine defend itself. As you all know well, we've provided a wide range of lethal assistance, including javelins, stingers, howitzers, drones, ammunition, and even Mi-17 helicopters. And while we're focused on Europe, we have not taken our eye off of the pacing challenge of China in the Indo-Pacific. Through Operation Pacific Pathways, we have deployed thousands of Army forces and equipment sets to the regions for exercises that strengthen joint force integration, demonstrate combat capability, and promote interoperability. In just the last 2 years, for example, the 5th Security Force Assistance Brigade has sent 40 advisory teams to 14 countries in the region. This kind of interoperability and the relationships that our Army forces are building with allies and partners in the region increase the potential for additional access and combined action if there is a future crisis. Our access, presence, and influence around the world are enduring advantages that contribute to integrated deterrence. To continue building enduring advantage relative to our adversaries, we are pursuing cutting-edge experimentation and innovation. Much of our experimentation activity will culminate this fall at Project Convergence 22, where our sister services will join us with operational units and new technologies to work together to solve important operational challenges. America's Army is fit, trained, and ready when called upon to fight and win the nation's wars. We are transforming for the future, something we have to do given the dangerous environment we face each day. I'm very proud of all that our soldiers do to protect our country and look forward to your questions this morning.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. General McConville.
Chairman Tester, Vice Chairman Shelby, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for your continued support to our Army and our people, our soldiers of all three components, our families, our Army civilians, and our soldiers for life, our veterans and retirees. The men and women of the United States Army stand ready to fight and win our nation's wars as a member of the Joint Force, and I cannot be proud of each and every one of them. The Army is well aligned with the National Defense Strategy through our existence priorities of people, readiness, and modernization. We win through our people. They are our greatest strength, and they are our most important weapon system. That is why people remain the Army's #1 priority. We are in a war for talent. That means recruiting our nation's best and modernizing our talent management systems. That means retaining the best. We recruit soldiers, but we retain families. So we are assuring access to quality housing, health care, child care, spouse employment, and PCS moves. When our soldiers get the call that it's time to deploy, we want them to be laser focused on their mission, knowing their families will be well taken care of at home. Above all, putting our people first means building cohesive teams where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, and everyone in every unit is highly trained, disciplined, and fit, and ready to fight and win. But being ready today is not good enough. We must also make sure we are ready tomorrow. And that's what modernization is all about, future readiness. The Army continues to undergo its greatest transformation in over 40 years, and we remain committed to our 6 modernization priorities. We will have 24 signature modernization systems in the hands of soldiers by FY23, either for testing or for fielding. Also in FY23, we'll stand up the 3rd of our 5 multi-domain task forces. The U.S. Army never fights alone, so we continue to invest in strengthening our relationship with allies and partners across the globe. We can see the return on those investments in our response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Never before have we asked so many to move so quickly, and we cannot do it without the access and presence our allies and partners provide. In less than a week, the 1st Armored Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division was able to deploy from Fort Stewart, Georgia, and beyond the ground in Germany, starting live-fire exercises with tanks drawn from Army preposition stocks in Europe. This is a testament to our tactical and strategic readiness, to the quality of our incredible logisticians, and to the investments Congress has made over the past several years in setting the European theater. When it's time to go, we go with the Army we have. And the Army we have is the world's greatest fighting force. We must ensure it stays that way, and with your continued support, we will. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both for your testimony. We will get to questions now. Look, we've talked about this before in my office. You're struggling to meet projected end strength in this fiscal year. Your budget proposes to reduce the Army's end strength next year by about 12,000 soldiers. This is for either one of you who wants to answer this. Can you please explain to the committee why this decision was made and what the impacts of this cut will be on operations?
Certainly, Chairman. As I said in my opening statement, we were primarily focused on wanting to make sure that we preserve the quality of the force, the level of soldiers that we're bringing into the Army. We could have, for example, lowered standards, taken in more Cat 4 soldiers, for example, issued more waivers, as the Army did several years ago, but we didn't want to do that. From an operational perspective, we're confident that at the level that we're reducing to, we'll still be able to meet our requirements. We do want to make some changes to how we're recruiting to try to help us come back up. We've done things like offer a $50,000 incentive for certain particular MOSs. We are allowing soldiers to pick their first duty station. But I think we need to look, frankly, given at the environment where you have, only 23% of Americans even eligible to join the Army, and you have propensity to join at, frankly, quite a low level, we need to look at some more substantial changes to how we recruit, and we've stood up a Tiger team to look at that, and we're going to try to be really creative and aggressive in terms of exploring ideas to help us going forward.
Okay. The Army Reserve is also well underneath its planned end strength, I believe, by about 9,000 soldiers. Yet your budget request is not reducing the size of the Army Reserve. Can you tell me why there's a different approach between active military and compared to Army Reserve?
Well, Senator, we're certainly having, as you know, we're having some retention challenges in the Army Reserve, in part because retention in the active is quite good. So we don't have as many folks leaving the active component and going into the Army Reserve. But the Army Reserve is also facing the same types of challenges in the recruiting environment that we are in the active. So we're looking at that and trying to make sure that we're balancing the resources that we're providing to all three components for recruiting.
Okay. General McConville, China is a top-pacing threat. This requires our military to be modernized with an emphasis on nimble distributed operations. My question for you is, what does the traditional standing land force model have to offer in Indo-Pacific theater of operations?
Well, Chairman, I think the land force has a lot to offer. Most of the militaries in the Pacific are led by Army forces, and we definitely have a role. But as far as our specific role, we play a tremendous role in setting the theater with logistics. We provide command and control. We're building long-range precision fires that will give the combatant commander the option to penetrate integrated air and missile defense capability. We're building mid-range capability that will hold a potential adversary's amphibious capability at risk. We're providing air and missile defense, which allows us to counter unmanned aerial systems, theater ballistic missiles, and also adversary air. And then we have a very highly trained, discipline-fit ground force that can seize and hold terrain or do a forced entry if required.
Secretary Wormuth, how is the Army being responsive to Indo-PACOM's vision for sustained joint presence in the region, and what can Army uniquely contribute to the joint force?
Chairman, we've got about $1.4 billion in the budget for support to Indo-PACOM and supporting the joint force. So primarily through Operation Pacific Pathways, that's a series of exercises that are underway in Indo-PACOM. We are trying to make sure that we have Army presence in the theater up to about 6 months a year. And so we are demonstrating combat credible forces in the region. We are also, through those exercises, trying to work on expanding our logistics capability in the theater and looking at opportunities for expanding our prepositioned stocks as well.
Okay. Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said at the outset, I'm concerned, and I think I'm joined by a lot of us in the Senate and the House, about the impact inflation is having on the Army and the Navy and everything else, and I'm sure you are too. At 8.5%, the current rate of inflation is undoubtedly impacting the approximately 1 million total force soldiers and their families, among other things. I'm also concerned that inflation will reduce the Army's buying power, as you realize, as your own modernization priorities shift from research and development into procurement. Did you, Madam Secretary, did you fully account for all foreseeable inflationary pressures in putting this request together? Because this request is going nowhere in the Senate or the House. As you know, the whole defense request looks ludicrous to probably the majority of the House and the Senate.
Vice Chairman, I think the department and certainly the Army inside the department tried to account for inflation as best we could when we were developing the budget and finalizing the budget. So, for example, in addition to an overall, $30 billion a year increase for the department's request, the department added $20 billion a year to try to address rising inflation. But that was before Russia went into Ukraine, causing energy prices to spike. But I am concerned.
And before the latest numbers on inflation, too. You know, they're just come out.
Yes, and I was just going to say, I am concerned, given where inflation is now, about our purchasing power. We see it, for example, in our Milcon projects, where construction costs are rising significantly.
The munitions industrial base, you know, as Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine has made some of the Army's capabilities in the household names, like the Javelin, the Stinger, and so forth. The U.S. as the U.S. provides billions of dollars, and we're going to do more, military aid, we're realizing just how finite our munition stocks are and how fragile, to some extent, our industrial base. Could you update us on the efforts by you and others with the Army, and how you're going to accelerate the procurement process here?
Certainly, Vice Chairman. You know, we are concerned about the industrial base, and we are working closely with defense industry to try to make sure that they're going to be able to ramp up production. So specifically, for example, with Javelin, I think the CEO of Lockheed announced just in the last day or two that they're working hard to double production in the near term on Javelins. When I talk to CEOs, you know, one of the things that I raise typically first are the supply chain issues, and, you know, how can we work together to shore some of that up? And it's something I think we're just going to have to continue to work on. I think the department, as part of the supplemental request, has asked for some additional authorities that will, I think, better position the department going forward to build up our munition stocks. And specifically, I would say the Army has substantially increased its investment in ammunition because we recognize the importance of having adequate munition stockpiles.
In the area of hypersonics, General, I'll address this to you. We're all pleased to learn that the Army will field its first hypersonic battery in 2023. But we all are concerned, and have been a long time, about the progress that China and Russia have made in this area. Have they surpassed us? Are we on par with them? We've got to win that war.
Senator, you make a very good point, and that's why we've been aggressively going off after hypersonics in the Army. We're very pleased with our progress so far. We have a battery at Joint Base Lewis McChord right now, and we're doing the final testing, and we expect to have that operationally in 2023, as you said, sir.
Talk to me a little bit, General, about recruitment. You know, we have an all-volunteer service, and it gets tough in recruitment. As you plan to reduce and modernize some of your soldiers, you still got to recruit all the time.
Yes, Senator.
What is the biggest challenge here? Is it lack of interest? Is it lack of something?
Well, Senator, I think we're in a war for talent. I think, one of the factoids that the Secretary talked about, 23% of Americans are qualified to come to the Army. But an interesting factor that I've seen is 83% of young men and women that are coming into the Army come from a military family. So we're becoming a military family business. I have 3 kids and a son-in-law that serve, and I think we need to, get more exposure and show the advantages and the pathways to success to other young men and women, so it becomes a American family business, and there's a call to service.
Madam Secretary, one last question. Dealing with the Army Futures Command. It was established as a 4-star command about 4 years ago to accelerate your modernization efforts. That's what we were told. As you prepare to put many of these efforts into the, modernization in place, you haven't, to my knowledge, nominated a new commander since General Murray's retirement, and this slot is open. Is that still true?
We are working with the White House to put forward a nominee for Army Futures Command. We intend to keep that as a 4-star command. I think there's been some speculation that we're thinking about downgrading AFC, and that's not the case.
If you don't have a commander in place of a futures command, you have no leadership, right?
Well, we have a very capable acting commanding general, Lieutenant General
But
Jim
he's
Richardson.
still acting.
Yes, we want to get that nominee over to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here and for your service to our country. Madam Secretary, there has always been an effort to take care to keep a bright line between our military and partisan political activity. Recently read an article by General Milley, talked about some of the challenges in the military today, and one of them was the politicization of the military ranks. Is this a problem, a challenge? And if so, what are you doing about it?
Senator Durbin, I think it's absolutely essential that the U.S. Army remain apolitical. Americans of all political persuasions have to be able to look to the Army and feel confident that it is apolitical and that it will follow the lawful orders of the Commander-in-Chief. So I do think we have to be concerned about that. I get concerned when I see the Army sometimes being put into a position where it becomes a political football. I think, the chief and I do everything possible to try to avoid that. We have reminded all of our soldiers, that they are not to engage in political activities, wearing their uniforms, for example. So it is something we try to reinforce all the time, that we must remain apolitical.
Glad to hear that. Let me mention to you, you talked about industrialization. I just want to put a plug in for the Rock Island Arsenal and the depots and arsenals across the United States that have risen to the challenge time and again. And I hope you'll make them part of your thinking about future demands for developing high-quality materials and equipment.
We are very much factoring in our arsenals into our organic industrial base plan, and I'm actually planning to get up to Rock Island in early June, I believe.
Good. Glad to hear that. General, you're watching this war unfold in Ukraine, as we all are. And we were told at the beginning, before the Russians initiated their advancement into Ukraine itself, that our experts thought it was likely to be 3 days before Kyiv fell and 3 weeks before most of Ukraine fell to the Russians, and we would have a multi-year resistance effort that followed. That didn't happen. Kyiv is still standing, and thank goodness the government is still in place, and most of the efforts by the Russians have not commanded territory to this day except for the Far East. So what lessons do you learn as a professional in the Army observing this in terms of the efforts by the Ukrainians, and I guess especially what have you learned about the Russian capacity to fight a war?
Well, Senator, one of my biggest takeaways as I take a look at what's happening is this idea of leadership and this idea of will. And if you take a look at, what a lot of people do when they do analysis, they'll take a look at the Russian army. They'll say they have very good capability. They have very good equipment. They have so much of it. And when they look at the Ukrainians, they say, hey, this is a much bigger country than Ukraine, has much more equipment. But there's that idea of leadership, and the fact that the president of Ukraine stayed and said he was going to lead from that country, the fact that the will of the people, everyone stayed and fought, that is like almost the secret sauce of every military. And very, very important to have cohesive teams that stay and fight. And sometimes that's hard to measure, but we're seeing the importance of that right now in Ukraine. They stayed to fight, and it's making a difference.
So if the projections and initial timetable turned out to be wrong because of the factors that you just mentioned, could you speak to the equipment and capacity of the Russians in the field in terms of their fighting capacity and in terms of our need for preparing for the eventuality of defending against that?
Well, we take a look at what the Ukrainians are asking for. They certainly want artillery. The Russians actually use artillery very, very effective. They fight with fires. They haven't been very effective with their ground maneuver forces, mainly because they're fighting tanks without infantry. They're not doing combined arms operations. And so when we take a look at what we need in an army, we can take a look at what the Ukrainians are asking for. They want long-range fires. They do want armor capability. They want air and missile defense. They've been very, very effective with the javelins. They want counter-fire radars that can determine where the Russians' artillery is, and they're putting that together with training and will, and that's why they're having the success they're having. And let's not forget logistics. Very, very important.
If I could ask one last question. Madam Secretary, I am all in when it comes to standing behind the Ukrainians, and I've made that well known to my colleagues. I think it's heartening that it's such a bipartisan feeling on Capitol Hill, and that's almost a rarity, but it is happening. In terms of our capacity and the equipment that we have warehoused and available and in production, are we being pushed to a limit where we have to reconsider any aspects of our own defense and how much is being allocated?
At this time, Senator, I mean, certainly we keep a close eye on, what our minimum requirements are. And as requests from the Ukrainian military have come in, we have factored that into our analysis. But at this time, I'm not aware of us being unable to provide a particular type of assistance to the Ukrainians because we felt like it would jeopardize our readiness. Now, I do think, we are working with industry to try to help them be able to ramp up production so that we can continue, as it looks like this is going to be a rather protracted conflict. We do need to do everything we can, I think, to be able to continue to provide assistance to the Ukrainians while making sure that we have the stockpiles we need.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, last week at the hearing, Secretary Austin stated that we would replace our munitions sent to Ukraine in the span of 1 year. Doesn't look like to me, from looking at that a little further, that's likely to be possible. I think the Javelins probably closer to 18 to 24 months, and the Stinger missiles, we haven't bought a Stinger missile, according to the CEO of Raytheon, for 18 years. Talk to me a little about whether you think that 1 year is possible, and if not, our efforts, how important it is that we get our stockpile of those two weapons at least back to where they were before the war began.
Senator, I think, the timelines for replenishment vary depending on what the systems are. You are right that we have not had an open production line for Stinger for some time. We do still have some missiles, some Stinger missiles that we can provide, but there is an obsolete part that we're going to have to figure out how to work around. Do we design around that or bring forward sort of a next generation Stinger? And I think that will take a little more time. And to your point, yes, I do think on the Javelins, I think Raytheon is trying to really accelerate, whether they can come inside of a 1 year period. I am not sure. I think it may take a little more time. But we are trying to work aggressively with industry in both cases.
You're committed to replace those stockpiles at least to the level that they were at, and there may be some congressional discussion about moving higher than the past level.
We certainly want to make sure that we continue to have at least our minimum requirements. So yes, I think we want to replenish and continue to be able to provide to the Ukrainians.
And General McConville, the Army's reluctantly, I think, requesting a reduced end strength in this budget because of recruiting. How's that going to affect a basic training post like Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri?
Well, I think what we'll see, Senator, is we'll have less young men and women coming through training. We see as a momentary pause, and when we say recruiting, we're talking a couple of thousand that's spread out around a couple of posts. So I get you the exact numbers, but it might be a couple hundred less coming through training. But we're hoping with a call to service, we're going to see young men and women that want to come back into the service, and we need to do that.
Yeah, well, I hope so too, and we'll be watching that. The Defense Department, this budget was really produced before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, before you got the FY22 bill on research and development. The Defense Department in the transition material said the highest research and development number we've ever asked for, and then you got a higher number than that in the 22 budget, which I hope we match that number and exceed it. But what are we learning from what's going on in Ukraine right now in terms of our weapon systems, the way that even a land war like this is being fought differently? I think, General, I'll go to you first on that.
Well, Senator, what we're learning is at least we're reinforcing confidence in where we're going with our research development and in our future weapon systems. We believe if we had us or our allies and partners have the long-range precision fires in place that we're developing, they would be very, very effective against the Russians because they would be able to take their artillery out, they'd be able to take their command control posts out. We think that the ship sinking capability is great to have. That deters any type of amphibious operations that a future adversary may want to do. We think where we're going with air and missile defense, and especially our focus on countering unmanned aerial systems, is going to provide some great capabilities that we're going to need to have to deter future adversaries. Our long-range aircraft, when we look at the speed, the range, and the convergence of the future battlefield, we feel very, very comfortable with them. So as we look at each system, we're weighing that on how that work either in Ukraine or against a more sophisticated adversary, and we feel we're going in the right direction.
Well, and I think looking at what's happened with drones and other things that haven't been in warfare before, I think we knew there were some weaknesses of the Russian tanks, but I don't think we anticipated quite how vulnerable they have turned out to be. So this is an important time for us to think about what our structure should look like. And Secretary, as Vice Chairman Shelby said, the fact that the 22 budget was bigger than you would have expected maybe when you submitted this, the inflation number is way off, and I think we're all looking at our weapon systems, as General McConville just mentioned, in a different way. I'd expect this is going to be a very vigorous discussion with the committee and the chairman and vice chairman as to what this budget needs to look like differently than maybe we would have thought in March of this year, and look forward to working with you on that, and you too, Chairman.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman. Thank you both for being here. General McConville, when you were Vice Chief of Staff, you signed an MOU with General Brown at USARPAC, committing at least $100 million in annual funding to address the backlog of infrastructure needs for the Army in Hawaii. We made a bunch of progress over the last couple of years, but this president's budget includes $0 for critical infrastructure improvements in Hawaii. How do you square this MOU with the current president's budget?
Well, Senator, we have a 10-year plan. As you know, we are building new barracks and capability, and then there are some items that if we have the opportunity to pull forward that are on my unfunded priority list, and again, we want to continue to get after those programs. We do have a plan, and we're trying to balance the resources we have to bring those to fruition.
Do we have your commitment to get us back on track?
Yes, you do, Senator.
Thank you. I want you to talk for the whole committee, for the staff, for anyone else who's listening, about Pacific Pathways, because I think in terms of bang for your buck, there's nothing quite like it in the entire defense budget. We accomplished so much in the Indo-PACOM region for so few dollars, and I'd just like you to talk us through how it works and why it's so inexpensive and why it's so highly leveraged and effective.
Yes, Senator, one of the things I think is really important is building strong relationships with our allies and partners, and that's exactly what Pacific Pathways does. We get to work very, very closely with those who share similar interests. We operate all across the Indo-Pacific. We watch very, very closely. It gets our troops into the various countries that we want to work with. We get access, we get presence. We also get the ability to influence their training, interoperability, and again, I think, when we talk about peace through strength, having strong allies and partners that work together, that train together in a scrimmage, if you will, is what makes us much better when it comes time to actually have to go to combat.
Thank you very much. Secretary, I want to talk to you a little bit about climate, but I want to divide it into sort of 3 lines of effort. The first, of course, is that the President's executive order requires all of the branches to transform over time their energy systems, transmission, distribution, generation, and fuel. Now, that can't be done instantaneously, and it can't supersede the mission. So that's one sort of bucket. The other is, and I think from the standpoint of readiness, this is the piece that needs to be addressed almost immediately, is you're just going to have increasing severity and frequency of severe weather events, both domestically and internationally, and we sort of need to contend with that as a strategic question, but also just a readiness question in terms of our soldiers getting either too hot or too cold or getting flooded out and all the rest of it. And then the third line of effort is how do we institutionalize these efforts so that the entire Defense Appropriations Subcommittee can get behind this as a national security imperative and not have it swing back and forth depending on who wins whatever election. So the first is the energy piece, the second is severe weather, and the third is how do we institutionalize this? You have a minute.
Thanks, Senator. I'll try to talk quickly. On the first line of effort, we are working to try to, transform our non-tactical vehicle fleet to be, eventually all electric. I think the Army has a very aggressive goal on that. We are even, we're doing some exploration of a hybrid version of the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. That's just an experiment at this point. But we are doing a lot to really help us with our vehicles. And there are some operational benefits to that as well. Quieter vehicles with less fuel requirements means that you don't have the kind of protracted supply convoys. That has, operational benefits on the battlefield. On installations and increasing severe weather events, we have installations all around the country that are affected by whether it's drought, wildfire, or hurricanes, and it has real impacts. And so we are investing in our installations to make them more resilient so that our soldiers can continue to train and can train, frankly, in more extreme temperature environments, which unfortunately I think is, going to be the future. On institutionalizing, I think, that's a great question. And to me, I don't know if I have the answer other than, I'm definitely a believer that your budget is your strategy. Where you put your money shows what your priorities are. But I think as long as we continue to emphasize the operational value of these types of investments, I would hope that would build consensus that the department should make those investments regardless of the flavor of administration, if you will.
Perfect. And one final thought is you now have senior advisors for climate in each of the service branches, and each of the service branches are doing really interesting things in the energy space. I want to make sure that if you figure out something that you share it with the Navy and the Air Force and everybody else. So let's make sure those senior advisors and those chiefs and those secretaries are in an ongoing conversation to sort of elevate and then scale best practices.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Madam Secretary, thank you. I'm anxious to have you as my guest in Kansas at Fort Riley and Fort Leavenworth, and I hope we can find a time to do that. General McConville, good to see you again. I want to focus on European Defense Initiative and what it means. I heard the chairman ask about in-strength earlier in the questioning. We have the 1st Infantry Division, as you know, stationed in Europe as part of Atlantic Resolve mission. The 1st Infantry Division only has 2 brigades, which takes me back to my constant conversation with you and others. Is the Army looking to increase its presence, as the Army looks to increase its presence in Europe and continues to rely upon a rotational basis, what conversations is the Army having on creating additional brigade combat teams? General?
Well, Senator, right now we're not looking at increasing brigade combat teams, or quite frankly, with the end strength we have and the size of the Army and the resources, we're looking at holding what we have. We are looking at creating new organizations like the Multi-Domain Task Force and some of the other enablers, especially with mobile, short-range air defense capabilities and some other type of units, but we are not looking right now at creating additional brigade combat teams.
How does the Army plan to use the National Guard's 5 armored brigades to assist our partners and allies in Europe?
Well, the way Senator, first of all, the Guard does incredible things. We're real proud of them, and what they're doing both at home and away is just magnificent. We don't go to war without them, and quite frankly, we don't do peacetime operations without them. So they are an integral part of the rotations. When we look at a Guard unit, we don't want them rotating every other year, but we do, and they want to have a mission out there, and they're part of the team. And so they will be part of that rotation in the future, just like they're doing right now.
What kind of training do you envision for our Guard and reserve soldiers? What will they be conducting in regard to our partners and NATO allies? What kind of training is the Guard going to be engaged in?
Well, if we take a look, we have Guard over there right now working with our allies and partners. They are highly trained, and so they're doing basic combat type training. It could be with javelins, it could be with stingers, it could be with combined arms, basic marksmanship. But they run the gamut of the type of training that our allies and partners need, and there's a much bigger emphasis moving right now on logistics and sustainment and maintenance of some of the equipment that we're giving to or loaning or allowing our allies and partners to use.
In regard to the javelins and other equipment, for us to be fully equipped as an Army by 2030, the budget calls for transition from development to production for a wide range of aircraft, precision fire, ground vehicles, and missile defense systems. I've suggested this to the chairman, although I don't know what his reaction was, but that we consider having a hearing in this room or perhaps in a classified setting in which we look at supply chain, where we are in our capabilities of providing the necessary equipment to Ukraine, and how to make certain that we and our allies have the necessary technical capabilities through production to meet our current demands. The war in Ukraine and our competition with China has made future production demands for these capabilities even more pronounced. In your opinion, does the Army have sufficient industrial base capacity to successfully execute modernize its priorities? And how will the Army manage transition from prototype to production? And how will the Army partner with industry to produce these capabilities? Madam Secretary.
Senator, I think we do have, I'm quite confident in the defense industrial base in terms of it being able to meet our needs with the work that we're doing across our 6 modernization portfolios. We are certainly working closely with industry to work through the supply chain challenges that I think have become very evident during the pandemic. But we have a 15-year organic industrial base plan in the Army just to work on our depots, our arsenals, to make sure that they're able to produce what we need and repair the systems that we're developing. And I think, in terms of crossing over, if you will, from the development phase into procuring some of the bigger systems that we're working on right now, we are really trying to look very early at affordability issues, the sustainment costs, the maintenance costs of all of these systems, to make sure that we're factoring that in and that we're able to afford it going forward. So I think we're on a good path, but we're going to need to continue to have a close dialogue with industry going forward.
And I think in this setting, you can't be more concrete than that, and I understand that. I do hope that maybe that if Fort Riley and Fort Leavenworth are insufficient to entice you to come to Kansas, that our defense industrial base would be of interest to you as well.
Well, I'm pleased to say I got to Fort Leavenworth. I've not gotten to Fort Riley yet, but I was able to go up and see the Combined Arms Center a few weeks ago. It was great.
Thank you for that visit.
Senator Rand, before I go to Senator Shaheen, I just want to tell you that I just talked to the ranking member. We're going to have a hearing on supply chain and inventory and classified session. What
Mr. Chairman,
power you have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for demonstrating my credibility and power in front of this august audience. Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary and General McConville. I want to start with the question that I asked at the full Armed Services Committee about the ENVGB, the Enhanced Night Vision Goggle Binoculars, because I'm still trying to understand how you arrived at your decision and how you can be comfortable that the integrated visual augmentation system, the IVAS system, is going to be able to effectively replace those on the timetable that you're looking at. And I want to, again, point out that today we have Army senior leaders who are going to testify in front of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Air Land about the modernization program. And as I'm sure you're aware, the testimony provided to the committee in advance of the hearing has Army senior leaders stating that the Army plans to begin conducting operational testing of IVAS in the third quarter of fiscal year 2022, and the plan is to begin fielding the system by the end of the fiscal year. I think that's what you told me in the full committee. So, again, last month there was an audit by the DoD Inspector General who found that the Army is at risk of wasting up to $21.88 billion in taxpayer funds to field a system that soldiers may not want to use or use as intended. So if during that operational testing deficiencies are discovered that would delay or limit the fielding of the system, what's going to be the impact on our forces, and how do you expect to deal with that?
Senator Sheen, let me try to address that, your concerns more effectively than I did last week. You know, the enhanced night vision goggles are a great piece of equipment, and our soldiers are very pleased with it, I think. And we have fielded, I believe, several brigades worth of those goggles, and the soldiers that use them are very happy with them. IVAS is, going to be a transformational, really, piece of equipment for our soldiers that provide some of the features that the night vision goggles provide, but also additional features. So, we really do want to move forward on that transformational path, but in a prudent way. So we are looking to the test that's kicking off this month, and I think we'll go through June to see how that plays out. We will want to take the results of that test into consideration as we decide how much of IVAS to buy, for example. But it really is sort of the first wearable technology for our soldiers. So, again, I thought some of the findings in the Inspector General's report were overstated. And I think Assistant Secretary Doug Bush can talk in depth about that, and I think have a great conversation with you about it. But we are not going to move forward with IVAS if we don't have confidence coming out of that test. So it will be an important milestone.
So when the testimony says that you're going to begin fielding the system by the end of the fiscal year, that may not be entirely correct?
Well, at this point, as I said last week, we feel good about where we are with IVAS, and I think our sense is that the testing is going to prove that the system and some of the kinks that we've been working on with Microsoft are going to be resolved. But if we were surprised, by the test results, we would certainly want to take that into account. But right now, the trajectory that I think I see in front of us is that we are going to move forward with fielding IVAS.
And is the testing regimen that's going to occur as robust and significant as the testing that you did on the EMVGB? Yes.
I mean, we try to test, we hold all of our equipment to the same types of testing standards.
And what's the time tape? How long does it take to run those tests? So
I believe that the test coming,
it would be done.
I think it's a month-long test. I think it's a month-long test, and then we'll take some time to look at the results of that test.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about it because, as I said, I continue to have real concerns about what's being proposed. I would like to just, if I can, Mr. Chairman, ask another question that may run over, because when you're talking about the recruiting goals and the challenges with recruiting, how have you factored in what's happening with the workforce more broadly nationwide?
Certainly rising wages, while a great thing for Americans, are a challenge that we're facing. So that we are looking at, again, things like recruiting incentives, the $50,000 bonus for certain MOSs. We have just put out a new marketing campaign called Know Your Army that tries to inform young Americans of all of the benefits of joining the Army, not just in terms of salaries, but also paid leave, the possibility of retiring at a relatively young age, help with buying mortgages. So I think part of what we need to do is better communicate the value, the benefits, if you will, but also the intangible, sense of purpose that I think the Army can give for a lot of people to pursue, their passions and challenges.
I certainly agree. I think that's really important. I would argue that one of the problems that our military is experiencing is the same problem that industries across this country are experiencing, and that is we have a lower birth rate, so we have fewer people entering the workforce, and we've had the most restrictive immigration policies in this country's history for the last 5 years, and that's had a huge impact on workforce. And Mr. Chairman, I know nobody wants to talk about it, but what we need is a comprehensive immigration policy that is going to address this. Thank you.
No argument here. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary General, welcome. Madam Secretary, thank you for being there in Alaska. We appreciate that focus, particularly on the very troubling issue of mental health and the rising level of suicides that we have seen throughout the Army and particularly up north. So appreciate your attention to that, and I'll have a question in that vein. But let me begin by raising the issue of your number one item listed on your unfunded priorities. This is a new multi-purpose physical fitness facility. We're kind of viewing it as an Arctic field house of sorts. I think we recognize that focusing on morale, focusing on readiness, especially in a region that is very cold and oftentimes very dark for much of the year. But it is kind of a standout figure there. $99 million for the facility is striking. So can you just provide to the committee, first of all, why you feel that this is the number one on your unfunded priority list, and really why is the price tag so high? Know that I'm going to argue for it, but I think it helps us to have a better understanding as to what exactly is required in the interior there.
I just was going to have General McConville address it, since it's the chief's unfunded list, maybe, and I can add if you like.
General?
Well, Senator, first of all, our troops' presence in Alaska is extremely important for national security, and at the same time, as you know much better than I do, it's a challenging climate for our troops up there. We want to give them the ability to be able to work out and have a physical fitness center that allows them to participate in activities 365 days a year, regardless of the weather. We've talked to the commanders up there and said, what can we do to help you? And this is what their priority was, and that's why it sits as my number one priority. I think we have to do something. We have a challenge on behavior health out there, and when we talk to commanders, they said that's what's needed. And I think the cost is just because where it's at.
Right.
It's challenging. Prices are going up, and we'd rather put the price. That's what they say it's going to cost to build the facility that we need, and we want to be able to do that.
And I would just add that if I'm not mistaken, I think the fitness center is also, it's going to be relatively large because there has to be an indoor track. We've got to have a track that our soldiers can train for the new combat fitness test, and so that, coupled with the high costs of material and construction, is part of the price tag issue.
Well, I appreciate you putting that on the record. We recognize that for so much of the year, it really is not safe to be training when it's 40 below. That's a little bit tough if you're trying to do miles. When we're talking about the Arctic and training in the Arctic, you have announced just last week before the Armed Services Committee very welcome news, which we appreciate, and that is the reestablishment of the 11th Airborne Division. I think this is great news. I think it's already bringing energy to our troops. We're watching daily as the kind of bulking up NATO's east flank continues with Russia, but we can't take our eyes off the fact that we have a western flank, we have a northern flank, and they all come together in the Arctic, in Alaska. So, welcome news. It's a great announcement. Part of my responsibility on this Appropriations Committee, though, is to make sure that we are able to fund this transformation. Can you inform the committee what actually will happen then to the strikers that are currently assigned to the 125th, whether or not they're going to go away, what the status is of the cold weather all-terrain vehicles, because again, that's going to be an investment. And then when you transform from an administrative to an operational headquarters, what might this mean in terms of resources and in terms of troops? So what we want to know is how we can help facilitate this in a manner that works best.
Certainly, Senator. Let me try to take that in turn. Yeah, we're very pleased about being able to reflag U.S. Army Alaska as the 11th Airborne Division. There won't be costs immediately associated with that particular step. We are looking at potentially taking the strikers out of Alaska, and if we have not made a final decision about that, but if we do that, we will basically take them and look at the ones that we can reuse elsewhere or basically use for parts. And then because a striker unit has a larger number of personnel associated with it, we will use those spaces to be able to increase the size of the headquarters, to go from an administrative headquarters to an operational headquarters. So really from a manning perspective, if you will, it will be about neutral. And we would be looking at basically having that division headquarters have sort of the same types of capabilities that you see in the 173rd in Italy, for example. So I think but we won't need to do, new military construction, for example, to house people at this time. So I don't think that these changes are going to have large price tags, but we will be continuing to put money in the budget for things like the CAT-Vs, for example.
Good. Well, I appreciate that, and please let us know how we can help with again, a transformation that I think is quite significant. And I think we recognize that this is going to help with the mental health, the behavioral health issues that we have spoken about when we were able to discuss the plan to surge mental health resources to Alaska in the immediate and then in the near term. So let us know, again, what it is that we need to do to resource that, because we know you just can't surge it up for 6 months and then take those resources away and expect all to be well in the world. My time has expired. I do want to ask, though, about why Arctic and cold weather gear continues to be on the unfunded list rather than in the base budget. I'm just reminded that we've got a battalion from the 425 that is jumping into Arctic Norway this week. And so when you think about what is happening on the ground right now, what Alaska can offer, what the Arctic force is that we need, you got to have the gear too. So hopefully we can address the Arctic gear needs as well.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I'm all into the cold weather gear. We have the Cold Regions Laboratory in New Hampshire, and so we definitely support that. Yep. Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And also congratulations on your elevation to the chairmanship. That's
I know. I don't know why they put me at the end.
I would address this both to you, Madam Secretary, as well as you, General. The MQ-1C Gray Eagle. So right now you use this for your multi-domain operations, and that drone system is a very important part of that mission. And currently, you've got active Army divisions that fly that mission, utilize it, but there are no Guard units that have the same weapon system, yet the Army Guard units comprise 45% of the Army's divisions and are, heavily used nowadays, particularly with all the demands that we have, not only on Army, but, in all the armed services. And so I guess my question is, why doesn't the Army Guard have its own Gray Eagles so that they can conduct these multi-domain operations, train on it, and obviously be ready, just as they do with all the other weapon systems throughout that the Army uses? And so how do we address that?
Senator, why don't I try this first, and then if General McConville wants to add. I'm a big believer of the total Army. The National Guard is an incredibly important component of our Army, and they've just done a fantastic job in the last couple of years, both here at home and overseas. Really, I think when it comes to the Gray Eagle, that platform has been very, very relevant in the counterinsurgency, counterterrorism environments that we've been, facing for the last decade or two. And I think when I think about, where we need to go with the Guard in terms of their equipment, it's looking to the sort of future large-scale combat operations and what kinds of capabilities do they need. So I think, I would want to, before we expand investment into Gray Eagles for the Guard, I would want to really look at, do I think that platform is going to serve us well in a much less permissive environment, for example, that if we were ever fighting Russia, for example. And I want to make sure that the Guard gets the new systems that we're developing that we know are going to be relevant for large-scale multi-domain operations. And we are committed to making sure that the Guard does get some of those equipment sets over time.
General?
Yes, Senator. I've talked to the Chief of the National Guard, and we are actually taking a look at what the Guard should look like to reflect the same as the regular Army in the future. The interesting, one of my surprises, kind of to what the Secretary said from Ukraine, was you would think that the Russians have a pretty robust air defense capability. And I'm very, very surprised that the Ukrainians have been able to fly the drones like the TB2 so successfully, because some would say, in that environment, that higher intensity environment, they wouldn't be very effective. But they have been pretty effective. So we have to take a look at that. But what we're trying to do is transform the Army with the idea that they may not be effective. So, in the future, if there's a robust sensor-to-shooter capability where people are going with counter UAS, that may not be where we want to invest. So we need to take a look at that.
Do you have a platform then that you're contemplating? Because this is what you utilize now, and of course you have to be prepared now, not someday. Which is going to go to my next question, and that is, with the deployment that you have right now for NATO, is that already stressing, your other missions, and is there going to be, help? Is it something you can adequately cover? Is there going to be more help in terms of NATO troops over there as this conflict continues? So, again, it's about, that's fine, but then I would want to know what you anticipate using so that you're prepared now as well as in the future.
Well, Senator, what I would say is, we're looking at all of the systems that we are developing now. I think we believe will have utility on a future battlefield. And so, for example, as part of the Future Vertical Lift program, we do have future unmanned systems that we are developing as part of that, that are called, air-launched effects. And we're very concerned about the drone threats of the future. So we're investing in counter UAS equipment for our divisions. We're looking at systems like directed energy MSHORAD, which could be used to shoot down drones. So we're definitely trying to look at that. And in terms of help in Europe, I would say, as we look at future force posture in Europe, and what that might look like for the United States, we're also very actively talking with our allies about what forces they might put in the eastern flank.
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah. General, did you have some thoughts on that as well?
No, I think the Secretary covered it.
Well, but I would like somebody to work with somebody on your staff in terms of what you foresee in terms of this domain operations role. What systems are you going to use? Because for the Guard to be part of that, they need to, be trained on that, have that system, just as you do with all your other weapon systems.
We are committed to doing that, Senator, and we will have the staff get with you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Senator Bozeman, are you Ready? We'll remove the Senator Murkowski in front of you, and maybe somebody could replace it with his.
I stole her seat.
Yeah.
I saw her in the hallway.
Good.
I'm like a fireman. I stay ready. Sure. Thank you.
You don't want to do that. Come on.
We've lost control. Well, thank you all for, I'm sorry, thank you very much, Senator. Thank you all for being here. We really do appreciate your service to your country and in so many different ways. Army leadership has worked tirelessly to restore readiness in the Army. As you know, readiness is fragile, and if not adequately sustained, it can decline quickly. This year's budget supports an Army end strength of 12,000 less than the authorized end strength of 485,000 active duty soldiers. Last week, you reasserted your position that you believe it is important to have a larger Army, but that you would prefer quality over quantity. General McConville, how is the active duty Army absorbing this loss, and where is the Army assuming risk?
Well, Senator, first of all, what we're going through right now is a process, and what it does is it leaves us less capability. You know, as we reduce the end strength, it means that we're going to have soldiers do more deployments than we would like. And so what we're trying to do is mitigate those risks by taking a look at organizations where we don't quite need that end strength or where we can man at less amounts. But we see this as a pause, a modest reduction in end strength. And as the recruiting winds change, we see the ability to bring back that end strength. And at least from where I sit, we do need a bigger Army.
Very good. In fiscal year 2013, the Defense Suicide Prevention Office received a base budget of $2 million. 10 years later, the DoD is requesting nearly $28 million for this office. This is double last year's budget and a $26 million increase from a decade ago. But the rate of suicides has continued to increase. It was recently reported that 2021 was the Army's highest level of suicides since the September 11th attacks. Just last week in this committee, Secretary Austin said suicide prevention and resiliency were a top priority for the department. Madam Secretary, in light of these recent reports of suicide in the Army and given the large increase to Suicide Prevention Office, what does the Army's relationship with this office look like, and are you involved in the strategy formulation process to address the DoD suicide problem? I've had the opportunity to deal with this for a long time in the VA, and we have a similar problem. When I came in 2001 in the House and was on the Veterans Affairs Committee then, we had 22 suicides a day. Here we are, you know, a couple decades later and still suffering essentially the same problem. So we're doing a number of different things to try and, you know, fight it at that level. So talk a little bit about the problem and how you feel like we best can respond.
Sure, Senator. And it is a problem, and it's a problem that General McConville and I are very concerned about, as are all the other leaders in the department. You know, I think the last couple years, you know, we're still sort of looking at the data on this, but it's, in my mind, it's very clear that the pandemic has deepened this problem or contributed to this problem, because I think, you know, our soldiers, like a lot of Americans, have been more isolated. And a lot of, you know, I think when people feel more connected, whether it's to their buddies or to their families, you know, they feel more supported. And the pandemic has chipped away at that. So that's why I think, you know, for example, that's probably part of why 2021 was such a bad year for the Army when it comes to suicides. We are working very hard on this. You know, as I said, we are you know, in Alaska, for example, we're doing 100% wellness checks. Everyone who is assigned to Alaska goes to see a behavioral health provider. We have at least one division that's doing that as well. We have provided a lot of training and resources to our commanders to try to help them identify, you know, early warnings. And, you know, it's still relatively early in this year, but at the moment right now, our suicide numbers are significantly lower than they were last year. So I think that is perhaps an indication that what we're doing is having some positive effect but we're not going to take our eye off the ball, and we're looking forward to the results of the Secretary's Independent Review Commission on Suicide.
Good. No, we appreciate that very much. And one thing that we're trying to do in the veteran space is put some really good metrics in place so that we understand what's working, what's not working. The other thing that might be a benefit that we found there is that the outside entities in the community, some of them do a very, very good job. And, you know, in an effort to, we've actually done a little grant program to involve them, but I think that's something worthwhile looking at also, is how you involve these groups in the communities that again, like I say, deal with this in a different way, everybody working together to help identify and really start making a difference in the numbers. So thank you all again. We do appreciate your service in so many different ways.
Thank you,
Madam
Senator Bozeman. Senator Murray, I leave the hearing in your capable hands.
Thank you very much. Welcome to both of you. Let me just follow up quickly on Senator Bozeman's comments, because this is something that we all are very deeply concerned about. He's right. We talked a lot about veterans. We've also talked about service members. But late last year, the Army announced it's going to be implementing a public health approach to suicide prevention based on CDC guidance, including a new training program. Can you give us an update on the status of that training program and the regulations for the program?
Yes, Senator. We have begun implementing that new training program, and we've really tried to draw on the CDC sort of, scientifically driven strategies. And our vice chief, for example, has started doing a chain teach of some of that training to commanders all across the Army. We also, we are continually working with our Army Resilience Directorate on how we can improve our suicide prevention training. So we're really trying to look at that very carefully.
Okay, well, I would ask that you continue to update us on this. Obviously, it's an issue of concern to many of us.
Happy to.
Let me ask you this. Last week, I pressed Secretary Austin to provide more insight into what the DoD is doing to provide better housing and more oversight for our military families who are living in really terrible and, frankly, unacceptable conditions. In my home state of Washington, we are still seeing issues with the availability of suitable and affordable housing at Yakima Training Center and at Joint Base Lewis McChord. We have military families who they're already making a big sacrifice for our country, but they are essentially being forced to live without access to safe, affordable housing in order to serve our country. I just think that is wrong and backwards, and I really need the Army to be doing everything, and I mean everything, if possible, to get this fixed. And now I understand the Army has a 10-year infrastructure plan, but that's a really long time when families need solutions right now. So can you share with me what more we're going to do to help families and improve oversight while that 10-year plan moves forward?
Certainly, Senator. A couple of things I would note here. This budget does include investment in barracks at JBLM, so that is something that we're moving forward on. On the family housing, I know when I visited JBLM last summer, I got an earful, frankly, about Lincoln and the privatized family housing, an earful, frankly. And so we really are trying to work closely. We have a couple of places in addition to JBLM. We've got Fort Gordon that has some challenges, Fort Leonard Wood that has some challenges, and we're really trying to work closely with the garrison commanders and the privatized housing companies that, build at those installations to try to get moving and improving family housing. One of the challenges I think we have is the whole issue of the rising construction costs and labor shortages. That is, in some cases, drawing out our ability to make as much progress as we would like to. But I would say our installation command is looking at this very carefully and really trying to be very aggressive. We will continue to work on the situation in Washington, and I would be happy to have my installations and Environment Assistant Secretary come and talk in detail about specifically what we're doing at JBLM.
Okay, well, can you tell me, are there problems with the policy or contracts around privatized family housing that stand in the way of our being able to get this right?
I think that our contracts are actually pretty aggressive in terms of the amount of oversight that they have in them. I was just actually talking to some of our housing experts yesterday. So I don't think that there are problems with the contracts per se, but I think it's just a challenging environment right now with construction costs and labor shortages. I don't think that we have contractual issues. We are, the Army made moves a couple of years ago to try to be much more aggressive in kind of holding the companies to account under the contracts and not giving them the incentive fees early, for example. And generally, I think that's been quite successful in getting the companies to do what they're legally obligated to do.
Okay, well, I would like my staff to follow up with yours on some of the issues that we're seeing.
Certainly.
This needs to be resolved.
Agree.
But to both of you, modernization of our forces and equipment is really a vital priority across all of our services. The Army, I know, has made important progress through Project Convergence. However, it still seems there's a long way to go until many of those capabilities are ready to be operational in the field outside of the testing environment. And I would like to know how you are balancing speed to get these systems to units while being confident that they will work as intended during a conflict.
Senator, I think we are trying to strike a good balance between speed and quality and surety of what we're investing in. Congress, you all have been very helpful in giving us new authorities to allow us to acquire systems more effectively. And we've been using them, for example, with the future vertical lift programs, for example, I think with some success. We've also been using them, but using our Rapid Critical Technologies Office to help us move more quickly than we usually do. I feel pretty confident that we are making good progress on a lot of these new systems, and we are learning a lot through Project Convergence. And this year, for example, we will be expanding the scope of Project Convergence to bring in operational units to use some of these new technologies. So they're not just in the laboratory. We are starting to use them out in the field, and you'll see something like, the long-range hypersonic weapon will actually be fielded in 23 in Washington State.
General?
I think one of the things we're doing, Senator, is we're as part of our strategy is using soldier touch points, and we're taking some of the best soldiers in the Army and some of the other services. We give them the equipment early on, and we take it out in really challenging places like Yuma when it's like 115 degrees, and they get to run around with it, and they have engineers there, and they come back and give us the information that we need to make sure it's a good system. And at least from where I'm at is we don't want to give anything to our soldiers that's not better than what they have, that's not safe, is not ready to go. Some of the systems are going to be what we call an alpha model. They're transformational. They're not exactly where we want them, but they're much better than what we have, and they have the ability to be improved very quickly with the type of strategy that we're using.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. We appreciate your testimony here today. Senators may submit additional written questions. We ask both of you to respond to them within a reasonable time. The Defense Subcommittee will reconvene on Tuesday, May 17th at 10 a.m. for a hearing with the Department of the Air Force. With that, the committee stands in recess.